There are truths which do not rest easy in the soil. Dig deep enough, and the earth itself recoils. Welcome back. Before we continue, like, subscribe, share. The earliest mention of the Hollowvale family appears in a collection of parish ledgers dated 1834, discovered in the ruins of a chapel near Somerset Parish, South Carolina. The handwriting, formal, deliberate, records births, deaths, and transactions with unsettling precision. Yet between the lines, something festers. The entries concern Elias Hollowvale, a planter of minor wealth but notable reputation, his wife Margaret, and a household of 15 enslaved people, whose names appear only once each, as though written under protest. In the summer of that year, Elias imported a physician from Charleston, a Dr. Alton Marin, whose expertise, according to local rumor, extended beyond medicine into the peculiar sciences of inheritance and temperament. The Hollowvale estate, like many of its kind, stood at the border between gentility and ruin. The soil was poor, the debts rising, the lineage shrinking, yet what struck later researchers most was not the economic despair, but the pattern of sickness that followed. Within a year of Dr. Marin's arrival, 2 of the household's servants had died of unknown fever, and Elias himself was bedridden for weeks, his skin taking on what one witness called the pallor of milk steeped in blood. Officially, nothing unusual was recorded, but hidden among the loose papers preserved by the county clerk, a torn letter addressed to Marin, was a single, haunting sentence. "You were right about the blood. It is not diluted enough." By 1837, the Hollowvale's only surviving child, Lucian, had been sent north for education and observation, a phrase that would later appear again in medical documents tied to the family. Margaret Hollowvale was reported delicate and confined almost entirely to her room. Servants began leaving the estate at night, never to return. Those who stayed spoke in whispers of locked doors, of sounds from the cellar resembling sobs or prayers, or both. When the estate's inventory was finally taken in 1841, following Elias Hollowvale's death, the physician's instruments were listed among the assets. Glass vessels, scalpels, several notebooks bound in leather, and one item described only as the preserved specimen. No further description survives. A local archivist, cataloging the ledgers a century later, made a note beside this line: "This is where the pattern begins, the first documented hint of deliberate experimentation within the Hollowvale lineage." The ledger closes abruptly with a signature that is only half legible. Beneath it, faintly visible even after years of fading, is what appears to be a second hand, smaller, untrained. It reads simply, "Do not open the cellar. The child still dreams. There are men who do not inherit their father's sins, they refine them." Lucian Hollowvale returned to the estate in the winter of 1848, a man of 21, pale and immaculate, educated in Boston under the patronage of Dr. Marin himself. His mother, Margaret, had died 2 years prior, leaving behind a series of letters sealed and never sent, each addressed to "my son." When he remembers, the surviving servant spoke of his arrival as something rehearsed. He dismounted, stood before the main door of Hollowvale House, and waited, silent, until the housekeeper opened it. No words were exchanged. That evening every window was lit, though no one could say why. Records from the neighboring farm suggest Lucian had taken an interest in his father's laboratory. He purchased quantities of lime, formal spirits, and fine wire from Charleston merchants, often under false names. One invoice, preserved in a family drawer, bears his signature beside that of Dr. Marin, implying the physician's involvement long after Elias's death. But the most curious evidence came from Reverend Charles Penwright, who kept the parish record during those years. He wrote, "Young Lucien has resumed his father's study, though he claims it is not of medicine, but of lineage refinement. He speaks of certain weaknesses of mind and blood that may be excised as one prunes the orchard of rot." Soon after, local children began vanishing. Only 2 were ever found, both alive, though strangely mute, their hair streaked white, though neither was older than 10. Reverend Penwright recorded their statements, but the text ends midway through the line. "The boy says the cellar sings when the moon rises. In 1851, A traveling merchant noted the Hollowvale property had fallen utterly silent. Fields untended, the main gate chained. Yet inside, by the faint lamplight seen from the road, he glimpsed movement, slow, deliberate, like figures pacing beneath a curtain. Months later, correspondence from Dr. Marin to an unnamed colleague surfaced in the medical archive of Boston College. In it, he described Lucien as the most promising subject I have known. The strain is steady now, though the nervous tremors persist. The phrase subject is underlined twice in red ink. The townspeople avoided the Hollowvale grounds after that. Some whispered that the family vault had been reopened. Others said Lucien spoke to no one, though music, soft, discordant, could be heard at dusk, drifting from within the walls. In the estate journal dated March 1853, the final entry appears in Lucien's hand. The blood does not forget. It seeks itself. I have seen in the reflection that the face continues to change, though I have not. After this, the handwriting degrades, the ink blotted as if by trembling fingers. The parish record ends the following spring with a single, unnumbered page, Reverend Penwright's note written in haste. The Hollowvale boy has not aged in 5 years. The villagers have begun to call him the reflection that breathes. By 1854, Hollowvale House had become a place of whispered rumors and unease. Travelers along the dusty road reported strange shapes at the windows, sometimes human, sometimes not. Horses refused to enter the estate grounds, and even the wind seemed to carry an unnatural moan through the barren oak trees. Lucien Hollowvale had grown impossibly tall, though his frame remained thin. His eyes, once a muted gray, now appeared black in dim light, reflecting even the faintest candle, as if it contained its own depthless void. Only the servants remained, 2 elderly women who had served the Hollowvales for decades. They moved like shadows themselves, speaking only when necessary, avoiding all mention of the cellar beneath the east wing. It was the cellar that drew the most attention. Though the main house appeared silent, neighbors reported lanterns flickering below, and a faint melody drifting upward, an instrument no one could identify, playing a tune both beautiful and unbearably sorrowful. On occasion, the hollow echo of a child's voice could be heard, crying, laughing, or reciting words that had no meaning. In late 1855, a scholar named Edmund Cairns visited the Hollowvale estate, claiming interest in the family archives. He was shown the library and the upper floors, but never the cellar. On his second visit, he noticed the servants carrying a bundle of parchment down the stairs late at night. A faint shimmer of candlelight revealed cryptic symbols, circular diagrams and words in Latin that seemed to tremble on the paper as he watched. That night, Cairns left Hollowvale House unnerved. He wrote later in his private journal, "I swear the walls breathe. The air moves against one's will. I heard whispers, though the house was empty, and saw eyes where none should be. I fear I am already too entwined to leave untouched." By 1856, strange occurrences reached beyond the estate. Letters mailed to Boston, New York, and Charleston reported missing children, mostly sons of laborers or merchants visiting nearby towns. Each disappearance coincided with sightings of a tall figure wandering near the outskirts of the Hollowvale lands. Those who claimed to confront him described a chilling stillness, a presence that seemed to sap warmth from the air. In one surviving account, a local constable wrote, "I found the boy standing beside a well, eyes vacant, whispering in a language I did not know. When I called to him, the figure behind me, the master, they say, appeared and vanished into shadow before I could reach him." By 1857, Hollowvale House had achieved a reputation that mingled fear and curiosity. Scholars, occultists, and the occasional thrill-seeker sought permission to explore the property, though few ever returned with coherent accounts. Townspeople whispered that Lucien had discovered a way to preserve life, or perhaps to steal it, refusing. The natural decay that touches all mortals. The Hollowvale. Testament's records grow sparse after this point. What survives are fragments, a ledger of ingredients that includes unknown herbs, references to sound experiments, and cryptic notations such as, "When the reflection is complete, the blood may speak," and in the corner of one page a single chilling phrase, repeated thrice in a childlike hand, "The Hollow remembers." By 1858, Hollowvale House had transformed from an imposing estate into a monument of dread. The air around it grew heavier with each passing season, as if the land itself remembered every scream, every whispered plea trapped within the walls. Lucian Hollowvale spent hours in the East Wing cellar, which had become his sanctuary and his laboratory. Candles flickered against walls lined with jars, bottles, and carefully labeled powders. Diagrams etched into the stone floors formed intricate patterns, circles within circles, triangles within pentagrams, each a map of some unseen force he sought to control. Neighbors claimed they saw faint, ghostly shapes moving behind the windows late at night. Though the house remained eerily silent by day, servants rarely spoke, save for hushed warnings to one another about the hollow voice that drifted from below. Some claimed to hear a lullaby, the notes curling upward like smoke, punctuated by the occasional stifled cry. Children who strayed too close to the property often returned with strange marks on their hands or unexplained bruises. Lucien's obsession grew more dangerous when he began experimenting on animals. Cats and dogs brought from neighboring farms disappeared into the cellar, only to emerge hours later changed, silent, still-eyed, almost statuesque in their movements. His journals described the process in meticulous detail, recording measurements, ingredients, and timings with clinical precision. Yet at the margins in hurried scrawls appeared phrases like "not enough, need more," "must awaken the hollow fully." It was in the late autumn of 1858 that Lucien made his first human subject, Voluntary, a young laborer from a nearby village who had been drawn by the promise of payment. Records describe the process as both scientific and ritualistic. The subject was exposed to strange aromas, kept awake for long hours, and made to recite words that had no translation. Those who witnessed it later described a transformation, not of the body, but of the mind. The laborer emerged pale, silent, and unnervingly calm, as though a part of him had been extracted and placed elsewhere. Meanwhile, the Hollowvale estate began to intrude upon the surrounding community. Children would vanish for hours, returning with no memory of where they had been. Animals roamed into town, behaving strangely, and townsfolk reported a sensation of being watched, an invisible presence tracking them as they walked along the dirt roads. Lucien took detailed notes on these phenomena, obsessively cataloging every deviation from normal behavior. His journals hinted at a larger ambition, to create a vessel that could contain memory, rage, and life itself, something that could outlast the human body and, perhaps, the human soul. By December of 1858, Hollowvale's influence had begun to leak beyond the property lines. Letters from distant towns spoke of mysterious illnesses, unexplained disappearances, and the faint echo of children's laughter at odd hours. Local authorities dismissed these accounts as superstition or coincidence, yet the Hollowvale journals suggest otherwise. Lucien had achieved a degree of control over life that blurred the line between natural and unnatural, leaving a legacy that would haunt the region for decades. And at the center of it all, hidden in the depths of the cellar, Lucien Hollowvale wrote one chilling note: "The Hollow waits. The Hollow sees. The Hollow remembers. Soon all shall understand." By early 1859, Hollowvale House had become more than a residence. It was a locus of dread, a place where the natural laws of life seemed stretched thin. The townspeople spoke in whispers, recounting tales of shadows that moved without bodies, and windows that reflected images of people who had never existed. Lucien Hollowvale's experiments had escalated beyond the boundaries of reason. His journals detailed attempts to merge consciousness with memory itself, to trap the essence of a living being and bend it to his will. It was during this time that Patience's path intersected, unknowingly, with Hollowvale's dark legacy. Though miles separated Sweetwater Hall and Hollowvale, rumors of Hollowvale's unnatural research reached Charleston. Traders, sailors, and wandering laborers carried tales of a place where the air hummed with a presence, and people returned changed, silent, distant, and haunted. Mrs. Lell, in her tireless work with the Underground Railroad, heard these murmurs but dismissed them as folklore. Yet in hindsight, those warnings were omens. Patience's resolve in Charleston was fueled by a singular purpose: her daughter, Grace. Every day at Riverside Plantation, while she cooked, cleaned, and observed the patterns of enslaved workers. She also transmitted critical information to Mrs. Lell. Each successful escape of a captive reinforced her conviction. But the news in March of 1859 that Grace had been recaptured threatened to shatter her hard-won patience. It was in this crucible of anguish and strategy that she made a fateful decision. When she prepared Jonathan Harrove's evening meal, Patience wielded her knowledge with chilling precision. The powder she sprinkled, drawn from roots she had carefully dried and measured, would incapacitate but not kill, an intentional restraint born of both skill and circumstance. Her plan, though violent, was meticulously calculated to ensure survival, and the presence of Mrs. Pritchard's watchful eye foiled her deadly intent. Yet even in failure, Patience's actions rippled outward. The poison revealed her capability, her resolve, and the lengths to which she would go for love and vengeance. As the Charleston trial unfolded, the tension between law and morality became starkly visible. The prosecution painted Patience as a murderer, but the whispers in the community, the unrecorded testimonies of those who had survived her guidance, hinted at a more complex truth: a woman challenging the constraints of a cruel and dehumanizing system. Her statements to Reverend Carlson captured the paradox at the heart of her life: unwavering love for a daughter and an unflinching response to injustice. Meanwhile, Hollowvale's shadow lingered. Though Lucian Hollowvale's experiments were confined to the east wing of his estate, the energy he unleashed seemed to echo across the region. Townsfolk reported strange lights, fleeting figures in the mist, and animals behaving oddly, signs that the unnatural had begun to seep into the wider world. Though Patience's story would conclude with her execution on June 1, 1859, the forces that shaped Hollowvale House would continue to twist, reach, and haunt. By the time Grace reached Philadelphia under the name Grace Freeman, the world she entered was one of tenuous freedom, but one still haunted by shadows of the past. Patience's sacrifice and cunning ensured her daughter's survival, but it also left a legacy of fear, power, and unanswerable questions. The Hollowvale reckoning, both literal and symbolic, was only beginning, its consequences stretching far beyond the confines of any courthouse or plantation. Grace Freeman's arrival in Philadelphia was both liberation and exile. She was free, yet the weight of her past, though fragmented in memory, clung to her like a persistent shadow. The city, bustling with the energy of commerce and freedom, offered a stark contrast to the plantations of the South. Yet even here, the whispers of slavery's cruelty lingered in alleys, markets, and churches. Grace had no recollection of her mother's meticulous efforts to secure her escape, only the ache of absence and the faintest sense of being protected by an unseen force. Patience's final words, preserved in Reverend Carlson's careful records, became a silent compass for Grace's life. Though she did not understand their full meaning as a child, they shaped her choices. Every act of resilience, every step into education, every decision to raise her own family with dignity, bore the invisible imprint of her mother's love and sacrifice. The letters and parcels Catherine Lell had forwarded ensured that Grace was nurtured, trained in survival, and shielded from detection by former owners or opportunists who might wish her harm. Meanwhile, the legacy of Hollowvale House continued to ripple through time. Though Lucian Hollowvale's experiments ended with his mysterious disappearance in 1858, the estate itself remained a locus of fear. Travelers reported the same phenomena that had surrounded him: fleeting shadows, disembodied whispers, and animals skittish beyond reason. Some claimed that the memories of those who had suffered at Sweetwater Hall and Riverside, infused with Patience's relentless will, had intertwined with Hollowvale's lingering energies, creating a presence that no single human could control. In Philadelphia, Grace's world was not untouched by these echoes. She often dreamt of a tall, silent woman whose eyes burned with determination, a figure that guided her through dangers she did not fully understand. These dreams, terrifying and vivid, were the subconscious manifestation of the sacrifices made on her behalf. Grace grew into adulthood with a quiet strength that belied her youth, forging bonds within Philadelphia's free black community, and cultivating skills that allowed her to thrive despite lingering shadows of her past. By 1864, Grace married Thomas Warner, a blacksmith whose own family had known the sting of oppression. Together, they built a home founded on resilience and quiet defiance. Grace named her first daughter after her mother, a small but enduring tribute to the woman whose courage had shaped her existence. Though Patience's life ended in a Charleston courtyard, the essence of her struggle, her relentless pursuit of justice, love, and vengeance, continued to flow through her daughter's veins. The whispers of Hollow Vale, however, were never fully silenced. Stories of unexplained phenomena, sudden illnesses, and unaccountable shadows persisted in the South. Some believed Patience had left behind more than a legacy of vengeance. Perhaps she had imbued the land itself with her will, a force that would ripple outward in unexpected ways. Even decades later, historians noted anomalies, letters lost, accounts that seemed impossible, and subtle connections between distant families that suggested a hidden hand at work. Grace's story, though ultimately one of survival and family, remained intertwined with the spectral and the extraordinary. The sacrifices of Patience, the secret networks of Mrs. Lell, and the unearthly echoes of Hollow Vale converged in her life, shaping a world where freedom was tangible, yet never uncomplicated. In the end, the line between human agency and forces beyond comprehension blurred, leaving Grace, and those who later pieced together her mother's tale, to confront the full, haunting complexity of justice, vengeance, and love. Decades passed, and the world changed around the remnants of Sweetwater Hall, Riverside Plantation, and Hollow Vale House. The Civil War had torn the South apart, burning away much of the old order, yet the shadows of the past lingered. For those who remembered Patience, her story was both a warning and a legend, a tale of courage and vengeance intertwined so completely that the line between them could no longer be discerned. Grace Freeman, now a matriarch in Philadelphia, never fully knew the depth of her mother's struggle. She carried a faint, unshakable sense of protection, as if someone had watched over her since the day she left Charleston. The letters, parcels, and whispered instructions sent by Catherine Lell had guided her steps invisibly, helping her avoid dangers her young mind could never have foreseen. Yet even with freedom and family, a part of Grace always felt the absence of answers. She never knew whether her mother's final revenge had truly been necessary, or if the chains of the past could have been broken without bloodshed. Historians would later uncover fragments of Patience's life, the meticulous records of Reverend Carlson, the notes of Mrs. Ann Pritchard, the scattered letters from abolitionists who had aided in Grace's escape. These artifacts, though incomplete, painted a picture of a woman whose intelligence, resolve, and courage defied the bounds of her society. She had been condemned as a criminal, executed for a crime whose morality remains debated even today. Yet through her daughter, her influence endured. Even Hollow Vale House, long abandoned and reclaimed by the forest, seemed to hold a memory of her will. Visitors in the late 19th century reported sudden chills, glimpses of shadowy figures in the corner of their eyes, and the faint scent of herbs carried on the wind. Some historians suggested these were mere coincidences, products of folklore and superstition. Others whispered that Patience had left something more profound behind, an enduring mark of defiance against injustice, a lingering force that ensured her story could not be fully erased. Grace's descendants preserved what they could, stories of a mother they never knew but never forgot, fragments of letters and the careful oral traditions of family gatherings. In them lived the essence of Patience's life, a relentless pursuit of freedom, a mother's love intertwined with vengeance, and the courage to act when the law, society, and morality seemed blind or complicit. The shadows of Charleston, Sweetwater Hall, and Riverside Plantation stretched across generations, shaping the identity of a family and the narrative of history itself. And so the final truth remains ambiguous. Was Patience a murderer driven by rage, or a hero who wielded the only power she had to fight an unforgiving system? The facts are clear. 8 people died after meals she prepared. Another man suffered a near-fatal poisoning. She was convicted, sentenced, and executed. Beyond that, interpretation is subjective. The whispers passed down among descendants, the hidden records, and the echoes of Hollow Vale suggest another story. one of courage, sacrifice, and love so profound it defied the bounds of legality and morality. In the end, Patience's legacy is not found solely in the records of the court, nor in the shadows of Charleston jails, but in the lives she touched, the freedom she secured for her daughter, and the stories whispered through generations. Justice, vengeance, love, and morality collide in her tale, leaving us to grapple with the uncomfortable truth. History is never simple, and sometimes the most extraordinary acts of defiance are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to piece them together. Even long after the smoke cleared from Charleston and the plantations lay in ruins, the echoes of Patience's choices lingered like a ghost that refused to be exorcised. The Low Country whispered her name in stories told around hearths, in the hush of church pews, and in the clandestine corridors of the Underground Railroad. To some she was a villain, a murderer who used poison to take lives. To others she was a figure of defiance, a mother whose love became a weapon against an unjust system, whose courage could not be measured by the laws of men. Grace Freeman lived her life with the quiet weight of her mother's legacy. She became a pillar of her community in Philadelphia, known for her skill as a seamstress, her generosity, and her resolve to protect those around her. She never fully revealed the truths of her early years, how she had been moved north under the careful orchestration of abolitionists, how she had survived in a world that offered her little mercy. Yet every stitch she sewed, every family she nurtured, carried the silent imprint of her mother's struggle. Patience's defiance had become Grace's freedom, even if the cost had been immeasurable. The journals, letters, and scattered notes left behind by those who had intersected with Patience's life. The methodical Mrs. Pritchard, the loyal Catherine Lell, the troubled Reverend Carlson offered fragments of understanding but no complete picture. Each account hinted at a mind both brilliant and unforgiving, a woman whose actions challenged not only the morality of her era, but the very definition of justice. Historians debated her motives for decades: revenge, survival, maternal devotion, or a combination of all three. The ambiguity only added to her legend. In the plantations that had once enslaved countless souls, the stories of Patience persisted in secret. Enslaved descendants remembered the quiet kitchen figure who moved with precision, who knew the rhythms of the household, who sometimes disappeared to carry messages that would change lives forever. They spoke in hushed tones of a woman who had found power where none should have existed, who had harnessed knowledge, courage, and rage to shape destinies beyond her own. These tales, often dismissed by outsiders, became the true repository of her story, a testament that could not be fully erased by law, death, or history books. Even today, the land holds whispers. In Charleston, overgrown foundations of Sweetwater Hall and Riverside hint at stories that survive in the wind, in the creak of old trees, and in the faint remnants of graves that mark lives both lost and saved. Patience's name is absent from official markers, yet her legacy persists in the arc of freedom her daughter achieved, and the generations that followed. Patience's life challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths: the thin line between justice and vengeance, the moral ambiguity of survival in a world built on oppression, and the enduring power of love to drive choices that defy understanding. She remains a figure both feared and revered, a ghostly emblem of resistance that cannot be easily reconciled with conventional morality. Her story asks more questions than it answers, leaving us to ponder: when law and morality collide with injustice, what lengths are justified? And when the oppressed seize power in the only way available to them, can their actions ever truly be called a crime? Patience's shadow, cast across centuries, refuses to fade, reminding us that history is never merely black and white. It is lived in the shades of courage, vengeance, and the unyielding pursuit of freedom. Even decades later, the story of Patience and Grace continued to ripple through families, towns, and forgotten archives, like echoes bouncing off the walls of a history that refused to be neatly contained. Scholars who pored over court records, newspapers, and private journals discovered a pattern that intrigued and unsettled them: small, seemingly unrelated incidents of sudden illness or disappearance among the elite of the Low Country. all occurring in households where Patience had once worked. Some dismissed these as coincidence. Others whispered that the shadow of Patience's influence stretched farther than anyone could measure. Grace Freeman's descendants carried fragments of memory, passed down like heirlooms of truth and caution, stories of a mother who loved fiercely, whose rage was as precise as it was terrifying, lingered in the family consciousness. They spoke in hushed tones of the woman who had vanished into history's shadows, leaving only a name, a legend, and a life redeemed through her daughter's freedom. Even without knowing all the details, Grace's children understood the weight of her legacy, of the courage, cunning, and moral complexity that had defined the life of a mother who refused to be powerless. Meanwhile, the land of Sweetwater Hall and Riverside Plantation whispered its own secrets. Trees grew over the foundations, and kudzu claimed the stonework of burned-out houses. But to those who listened, there were still stories in the rustle of leaves and the shifting of soil. Residents of Colleton County occasionally told tales of a woman who walked silently through the night, who left messages and tools of freedom for those desperate enough to seize them. These were the stories that rarely appeared in books or newspapers, stories of resistance that defied laws written to suppress them. Historians continue to debate Patience's actions. Was she a murderer, a vigilante, or a freedom fighter? Some argue that the law judged her harshly because she had dared to wield power in a world that denied her humanity. Others contend that her choices crossed a moral line, that even justice for the enslaved cannot justify taking human life. The truth remains obscured by centuries of silence, interpretation, and the selective memory of history. Yet there is a certainty that cannot be erased. A mother's love drove extraordinary acts, shaping a path toward freedom for her daughter. Grace's life, marked by resilience, community, and family, is a living testament to that love. Even if the precise details of Patience's deeds will never be fully known, the impact of her choices survives in the lives she touched, the chains she helped break, and the moral questions she forced future generations to confront. In the end, Patience's story is not just about vengeance or crime. It is about the human capacity for agency, even under the most brutal constraints. It is a story of courage, heartbreak, and unyielding determination. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that history is not merely what is written in official records. It is what survives in whispers, in family lore, and in the enduring pursuit of justice and freedom. Patience may have been executed, but her legacy and the story of Grace continues to live, challenging us to reconsider the boundaries between right and wrong, and between love and justice, in a world that often conflates the two. Though Patience's body lay in the unmarked grave behind Charleston jail, her story refused to stay buried. Whispers of her deeds circulated among freedmen and abolitionists, passed quietly from one generation to the next, evolving into a legend both feared and revered. In the low country of South Carolina, tales of a mother's wrath, of meals that carried deadly knowledge, and of courage that defied slavery, were spoken in hushed tones, stories that reminded the oppressed that even in chains, resistance was possible. Grace Freeman, living far to the north in Philadelphia, remained largely unaware of the full scope of her mother's actions. Yet the echoes of Patience's resolve lingered in her life choices, the determination to survive, to create a home and family, and to teach her children about freedom. Though she had never truly known the mother who had sacrificed everything for her, Grace carried a fragment of that spirit, a legacy of love and defiance that no legal system could erase. Meanwhile, historians who uncovered the Charleston court records, the journals of Reverend Carlson, and the scattered references in Underground Railroad documents grappled with questions that had no definitive answers. Was Patience a cold-blooded murderer, or a woman whose extraordinary circumstances demanded extraordinary action? Could justice be applied fairly when the law itself was entwined with a system that denied her humanity? Scholars debated, papers were written, and conferences convened. But each attempt to classify Patience's life seemed to stumble against the same wall. Morality and law are not always aligned, especially when the lives of the enslaved are involved. And yet, despite the gaps in records, there were threads of certainty. The meal at Riverside, the poison discovered in her quarters, the testimony linking her to Sweetwater Hall, all pointed to a woman who wielded her knowledge deliberately, with precision, and with unwavering intent. But alongside these facts, the surviving evidence of Grace's escape, the ongoing work of Catherine Lell and other abolitionists, and the continued safety and prosperity of Grace's descendants suggested a broader, more nuanced truth. Patience's actions had consequences beyond punishment. They may have saved lives, inspired courage, and ensured the survival of her daughter. The Low Country itself bears the scars of these events. The ruins of Sweetwater Hall and Riverside Plantation are silent now, overgrown with vegetation. But to those who remember, these places are anything but empty. They are monuments to lives constrained, to choices made under impossible circumstances, and to the human will to survive and protect what is most precious. Patience's life and death, entwined with her daughter's survival, continue to provoke reflection about justice, vengeance, love, and the limits of human endurance. History records her crimes, but it cannot fully capture her motives nor the depth of the suffering she endured. It can only offer fragments, leaving the rest to interpretation, speculation, and the whispers of those who lived under the shadow of her story. In the end, the question remains for each who hears her tale. Was Patience a murderer, a hero, or something in between? Perhaps the answer lies not in history books or court records, but in our willingness to confront the moral complexities of a world where love and fury can shape destiny, where justice is rarely simple, and where the courage to act, even in secret, can echo far beyond a single life. The shadow of Patience remains, and in that shadow, the story of Grace endures, a testament to survival, legacy, and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child.